The first time I realized something was wrong, I was 8 years old. Not because someone yelled at me. Not because anyone called me unwanted. Nothing that obvious ever happened in the Ashford family. People like us didn't create scandals, we created impressions. Appearances. Narratives. And sometimes those narratives quietly erased inconvenient details, including daughters. At 8 years old, I didn't understand any of that. I only knew that my family was taking a Christmas photograph and somehow I wasn't in it. The Ashford estate looked magical during December. Even now, when I think about it, I remember the lights first. Thousands of tiny white lights wrapped around ancient trees. Garlands hanging from stone railings, wreaths larger than car tires, fresh pine filling every hallway. Everything looked perfect. That was important to my mother. Perfection wasn't a goal. It was a requirement. Every ribbon had to match. Every centerpiece had to align. Every family member had to play their role, especially in public. I stood at the top of the grand staircase watching the photographer set up equipment in the ballroom. Huge lights. Tripods. Reflectors. The whole production looked like a magazine shoot. Maybe it was. The Ashford family occasionally appeared in magazines. That happened when your grandfather had a university library named after him. Victoria. I turned. My mother was descending the staircase. Elegant as always, cream-colored dress, perfect posture, perfect smile. Everything about her looked intentional, even her kindness. Especially her kindness. Yes, Mom. She glanced toward the ballroom. Why aren't you upstairs? I frowned. What do you mean? We're taking family photographs. Exactly. The confusion must have shown on my face, because her smile tightened just slightly. The way it always did when I wasn't following the script. Sweetheart. The photographer only planned for 3. I blinked. 3. I counted automatically. Mom. Dad. Me. Caroline. That was 4. Even an 8-year-old could do that math. But we're 4. The words escaped before I could stop them. My mother's expression changed. Not anger, something colder. I wouldn't recognize it until years later. Disapproval. Your sister is part of the formal composition. Formal composition. I didn't understand the phrase. Not completely. I only understood what it meant. I wasn't included. Why? The question seemed reasonable. Apparently it was in single quotas. My mother sighed. A soft, controlled sigh. The kind adults use when children make things inconvenient. Because that's what we decided. And there it was. The Ashford answer. The answer that wasn't an answer. The answer that ended conversations. I remember standing there after she walked away, listening to activity below. Photographer instructions. Staff moving decorations. My father's voice. Caroline laughing. Nobody came looking for me. Nobody asked where I was. Nobody noticed. An hour later I watched from the upstairs balcony, hidden behind a railing. My family stood together in front of a massive Christmas tree. My father placed a hand on Caroline's shoulder. My mother smiled warmly. The photographer adjusted lighting, then clicked the camera. Again. And again. And again. The Ashford family, 3 people. Perfect. Complete. Whole. At least according to the photograph. I cried that night. Quietly. Into my pillow. The way children cry when they don't understand what's happening but know it hurts. The next morning my father found me reading in the library, one of the few places I genuinely felt comfortable. Books made sense. People didn't always. Victoria. I looked up. Double quotes. Yes. He sat across from me. Unusual. My father rarely sat. He moved. Directed. Managed. Supervised. You seemed upset yesterday. For a moment hope appeared. Maybe he noticed. Maybe someone finally noticed. A little. He nodded. Then smiled. A small professional smile. The kind he used during business meetings. You shouldn't take these things personally. I stared at him. What things? The photograph. I waited. Certain there was more. An explanation. A reason. Anything. Instead he said, not every decision is about you. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and left. I remember staring after him. Confused, because I hadn't said it was about me. The photograph literally was about me, or rather about my absence, but I was 8. I couldn't articulate that. I only knew something felt wrong. That Christmas, the family newsletter arrived. The same newsletter sent to hundreds of people every year, printed on expensive cardstock, gold lettering. Professional photographs, updates about family accomplishments. I flipped through it excitedly. Searching for myself. Page 1. Nothing. Page 2. Nothing. Page 3. Nothing. Then the family portrait. The photograph from the ballroom. Mom.Dad.Caroline. No Victoria. I stared at the image for a long time, trying to understand, trying to convince myself there had been a mistake. There wasn't. At the bottom of the page a caption read, "The Ashford family wishes you a Merry Christmas." I read that sentence over and over, the Ashford family, and somehow I wasn't in it. That was the first year. I didn't know it then, but it wouldn't be the last. It would be the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would follow me through childhood, through college. Through adulthood. For 16 years. And the strangest part, the most painful part, nobody ever talked about it. Not my parents, not the relatives who received the newsletters, not the friends who saw the photographs, not even Caroline. The silence became part of the tradition. And traditions are dangerous things, because the longer they continue, the more normal they seem, even when they're hurting someone, even when they're wrong. Especially when they're wrong. At 8 years old, I couldn't understand any of that. I only knew one thing. The family photograph hung in the hallway after Christmas. Framed. Displayed proudly, passed by every day. And every time I looked at it, I felt the same strange sensation. Like I was standing outside a window, watching another family live my life. I just didn't realize yet how long I'd be standing there. By the time I turned 10, I had learned two important things. The first was that my family never discussed uncomfortable topics. The second was that Caroline could do no wrong. Those lessons arrived together, repeatedly. Year after year, until they became impossible to ignore. Caroline was 2 years younger than me. If you asked anyone outside the family, they would have described us as close. We attended the same schools, lived in the same house, appeared at the same charity events, shared the same last name, the same parents, the same privileges. At least on paper, reality looked different. Reality usually does. One afternoon, I came home with a perfect report card, straight A's. Every subject. Every teacher comment positive. I remember carrying the envelope carefully. Excited. Proud. Hopeful. At 11 years old, approval still felt possible. My mother was sitting in the sunroom reviewing plans for an upcoming gala when I handed her the report card. She glanced at it briefly. Very nice. That was it, very nice. Then she returned to her paperwork. I stood there for a moment, waiting, expecting something more. Nothing came. A few days later, Caroline received a participation ribbon from a local horseback competition. Not first place. Not second. Not even third. Participation. My parents hosted a dinner. 20 guests attended. Champagne flowed. Photographs were taken. Toasts were made. I remember sitting at the far end of the table listening to people congratulate Caroline. She wasn't a bad writer. That wasn't the point. The point was the difference. One child earned praise. The other earned expectation. I began noticing that pattern everywhere. When Caroline succeeded, it was celebrated. When I succeeded, it was assumed. When Caroline struggled, she received support. When I struggled, I received advice. When Caroline made mistakes, people explained them. When I made mistakes, people remembered them. It wasn't dramatic. Not at first. The worst family dynamics rarely are. They're subtle. Gradual. Accumulated. Like water wearing away stone, one tiny moment at a time. The summer I turned 12, my father took Caroline sailing, just the two of them. That wasn't unusual. They spent time together constantly. What surprised me was discovering the trip had originally been mine. I learned that accidentally. A family friend mentioned how excited I must be for the sailing weekend. I had no idea what she was talking about. The confusion on my face answered her question immediately. Oh. She looked uncomfortable. I assumed she never finished the sentence. She didn't need to. Later that night I asked my father, was there supposed to be a sailing trip? He barely looked up from his newspaper. Plans changed. Why? Another page turned. Caroline wanted to go. That was the entire explanation. Caroline wanted to go. Therefore Caroline went. Case closed. I remember lying awake that night staring at the ceiling. Not angry. Not yet. Mostly confused, because nobody seemed to notice how often these things happened. Or maybe they noticed, maybe they simply didn't care. I wasn't sure which possibility hurt more. The older I became, the harder it was to ignore. Teachers noticed, friends noticed, even household staff occasionally noticed. Nobody mentioned it directly. Of course not. The Ashfords valued discretion, but sometimes I caught expressions. Glances. Moments. People observing something they knew wasn't right. And then looking away. Looking away became a theme, especially during family events. By 13. The Christmas photographs had become routine. Every year followed the same pattern. A photographer arrived. Caroline dressed beautifully. My parents posed proudly. I disappeared. Sometimes I stayed upstairs. Sometimes I hid in the library. Sometimes I left the property entirely. Nobody stopped me, nobody asked me to stay. Eventually I stopped expecting them to. That was the year my grandmother first noticed. Not fully, not yet, but enough to plant a seed. Eleanor Ashford missed very little, especially where people were concerned. During Christmas dinner she looked around the table. Then frowned. Where's Victoria? The room went strangely quiet. Only for a second, but I noticed. So did she. My mother answered immediately. She's reading. Eleanor frowned deeper. On Christmas. A pause. Then my father smiled. You know Victoria. Everyone laughed politely. Everyone except Eleanor, because she wasn't asking why I was reading. She was asking why I wasn't there. The distinction mattered. Years later I would realize that was the first crack. The first tiny fracture in the story my parents had constructed. A small question. An innocent observation. The beginning of the end. At the time. None of us understood that, least of all me. I was upstairs in the library, curled in a leather chair, reading a novel, trying not to think about the family dinner happening downstairs, trying not to think about the photograph taken earlier that day. The latest version of the Ashford family. The latest version without me. What I didn't know was that someone downstairs had finally started paying attention. And once Eleanor Ashford started paying attention, people rarely enjoyed the outcome. The first person to notice my absence wasn't a teacher. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't even me. It was my grandmother. And that fact would eventually change everything. At 13, I still believed adults understood more than children. I assumed there had to be a reason for the strange hierarchy inside my family. A reason Caroline always came first. A reason I always came second. A reason I somehow disappeared whenever image mattered. I didn't understand yet that adults are often just children with better vocabulary. And sometimes they spend decades protecting lies. The year I turned 13. Eleanor Ashford began asking questions. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Carefully. The way intelligent people investigate things. At first, nobody noticed. Not even my parents. The questions seemed harmless. How is Victoria doing in school? Has Victoria decided what summer programs she's applying for? Why isn't Victoria joining us for dinner? Simple questions. Normal questions. Questions grandparents ask every day. Yet every time Eleanor asked one, the answers felt rehearsed. She's busy, she's studying, she's independent. She's always preferred being alone. The same explanations appeared again and again. Eventually even Eleanor noticed. Because good lies require variation. The best liars understand that. My parents did not. One afternoon Eleanor arrived unexpectedly at the estate. That alone caused chaos. My grandmother rarely visited without warning. She valued efficiency. My mother valued preparation. The combination was dangerous. I happened to be sitting in the library when Eleanor walked in. A massive biography rested open on my lap. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The entire house felt unusually peaceful. Then she appeared. Well, I looked up. There you are. I smiled immediately. Unlike most family interactions, seeing Eleanor actually made me happy. Hi, Grandma. She crossed the room and kissed the top of my head. What are you reading? I showed her the cover. Her eyebrows rose. That's ambitious. I shrugged. It seemed interesting. It does. Then she sat across from me. And studied me. Not in the way my mother studied people. Not evaluating. Not judging. Observing, trying to understand. There is a difference. A very important difference. After several minutes she asked, why aren't you at writing practice? I blinked. I'm not writing this year. Her forehead creased. Since when? Since Caroline wanted another horse. The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence followed. For the first time I realized how strange that sounded. Because saying something aloud often reveals its shape, and suddenly I could hear it. The unfairness, the absurdity. The resignation. Eleanor heard it too. Explain. I hesitated. Then I did. The second horse. The budget changes, the schedule adjustments, the activities cancelled. The opportunities redirected. Every small compromise. every small sacrifice, every small decision that somehow benefited the same child. As I spoke, Eleanor became very quiet. Not angry, not yet. Thoughtful. That was usually worse, because thoughtful people eventually reach conclusions, and Eleanor was exceptionally thoughtful. When I finished, she asked, "Does this happen often?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because I genuinely didn't know how to answer. How do you explain normal, especially when normal isn't normal? I guess. Her expression tightened. That answer clearly bothered her. Good. It should have. The conversation moved on. Eventually. But something had changed. I could feel it, like the first crack in ice before the entire surface breaks. Small. Subtle. Important. That evening Eleanor joined us for dinner. The dining room glowed with candlelight. Silver gleamed. Crystal reflected warm light. Everything looked beautiful. The Ashford family specialized in beautiful appearances. Reality required more effort. Halfway through dinner Eleanor set down her wine glass. Then asked a question. A simple question. The kind that seems harmless until it isn't. Have the Christmas photographs arrived yet? My mother's smile appeared instantly. Of course, may I see them? A brief pause. Only a brief one, but I noticed. So did Eleanor. The album arrived moments later. She opened it, turned pages, examined images, and suddenly stopped. The room became very still, because there it was, the annual Ashford family portrait. 3 people. My father. My mother. Caroline. No Victoria. Again. Eleanor stared at the photograph. Then looked around the table. Slowly. Carefully. Deliberately. Finally her eyes landed on me. Then on the photograph. Then back on me. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The silence stretched. Longer. Then Eleanor asked the question. The first real question. The one nobody wanted. Why isn't Victoria in the picture? My mother's smile froze. My father's posture changed slightly. Caroline looked at her plate. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't the only person who thought something was wrong. Someone else saw it too. Someone powerful. Someone impossible to dismiss. Someone who had just started asking questions. And once Eleanor Ashford started asking questions, the truth was only a matter of time. The silence after Eleanor's question lasted only a few seconds. It felt much longer. Years later, I would remember every detail of that moment. The flicker in my mother's eyes, the way my father straightened slightly, the way Caroline suddenly became fascinated by her plate, the way nobody seemed surprised by the question. Only worried. There is a difference. Victoria doesn't enjoy photographs. My mother answered first. Immediately. Smoothly. Effortlessly. As though she delivered the explanation many times before. Maybe she had. Eleanor looked at me. Not my mother. Me. Double quotes. Is that true? The room became even quieter. I wasn't used to being asked. Usually people explained me. Spoke for me. Interpreted me, defined me. Very rarely did anyone ask. I don't mind photographs, I said. My mother's smile tightened, only slightly, but I noticed. Eleanor noticed too. Then why aren't you in them? Nobody answered immediately, because the first lie had failed. Now they needed another. My father stepped in. The photographer recommended a smaller composition. Composition. Again. That word. The same word I'd heard years earlier. As if family members were furniture. As if daughters could be rearranged. As if belonging depended on symmetry. Eleanor stared at him for several seconds, then looked back at the photograph. 6 years in a row. The question landed like a stone. 6 years. I hadn't realized she'd noticed that. Apparently she had. Every year. Every missing image. Every absence. Documented. Remembered. The room felt uncomfortable now, for the first time ever. My parents were being forced to explain something they'd assumed nobody would question, and they weren't prepared, because people rarely prepare for truth, only for appearances. Victoria has always preferred independence, my mother said. There it was again. The official story, the narrative. The explanation they had built over years. Independent. Private. Distant. Different. Words that sounded harmless, until you realized they were being used to justify exclusion. Eleanor turned toward me again. Have you? I hesitated. Then answered honestly, no. The silence that followed felt enormous. My grandmother didn't react immediately. She simply nodded. Then returned to dinner. The conversation moved elsewhere. Politics. Charity work. Travel plans. Normal topics. But something had changed. I could feel it. Questions had entered the room, and questions rarely leave quietly. especially when Eleanor Ashford is asking them. That night I couldn't sleep. Rain tapped against the windows. The estate creaked softly in the darkness. I kept replaying the dinner conversation. Not because of what was said, because of what wasn't. Nobody had defended me. Nobody had corrected the story. Nobody had acknowledged the obvious, except Eleanor. For years I'd assumed everyone saw what happened and accepted it. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe some people simply hadn't looked closely enough. Maybe nobody had ever challenged the narrative before. Maybe the story survived because questioning it was inconvenient. The thought stayed with me. A week later, Eleanor invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. That had never happened before, not alone, not intentionally. I arrived nervous. The restaurant overlooked the harbor. Quiet, elegant, old-fashioned. Very Eleanor. She ordered tea. I ordered coffee. Then she got straight to the point. Tell me about the photographs. No small talk. No warm up. No strategy. Just the question. The real question. My stomach tightened. Because suddenly I had a choice. Tell the truth, or protect the story. The same choice I'd been making for years. Only this time someone was listening. Samin, who genuinely wanted the unsweary, looked out the window, watched sailboats drift across grey water. Then I told her everything. The first portrait. The explanations. The missing newsletters. The holiday cards. The graduations. The family events. Every small exclusion. Every small humiliation. Every moment I'd convinced myself didn't matter. Because admitting it mattered hurt too much. Eleanor listened without interrupting, without defending anyone, without making excuses. She simply listened, and sometimes that's the most powerful thing a person can do. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long time. Finally she asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The question surprised me, because I'd never considered it. Why hadn't I? The answer arrived slowly. I thought everyone knew. She frowned, and I laughed softly, a sad laugh. I thought if nobody cared, telling them wouldn't change anything. The look on her face broke my heart, not because she was angry, because she looked devastated. As though she'd just discovered something precious had been damaged while she wasn't paying attention. "Victoria." Her voice was very quiet. I didn't know. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she reached across the table and took my hand, and for the first time in years, I believed her, because unlike everyone else in my family, Eleanor wasn't defending the story. She was questioning it. And questions lead to answers, answers lead to evidence, evidence leads to truth. What neither of us knew then was that the truth was far worse than either of us imagined, because the missing photographs were only the beginning. Much bigger secrets were waiting beneath them. And soon, Eleanor Ashford was going to uncover the first one. The first clue appeared 3 weeks after our lunch. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope. Handwritten. Addressed to Eleanor Ashford. Postmarked nearly 7 years earlier. At first, nobody understood why it mattered. Not even Eleanor. The envelope had been discovered in an old storage room above the estate's carriage house. One of the staff members found it while clearing shelves. Apparently it had fallen behind a cabinet years ago. Normally, that would have been insignificant. A misplaced letter. An ordinary mistake. Except for one detail. The handwriting. My handwriting. Eleanor called me immediately. "Victoria." Something in her voice made me sit upright. "What happened?" "I found one of your letters." I froze. "My what?" "A letter." Silence. "Then, the one you supposedly never sent." My pulse quickened, because suddenly I understood. Years earlier, Eleanor had mentioned writing me. I never received those letters. Now she had one of mine. One she'd supposedly never received. And neither explanation made sense. Unless someone had intervened. The next morning I drove to the estate. The envelope waited on Eleanor's desk. The moment I saw it, I recognized it. Blue ink, curved handwriting, a tiny smudge near the corner. I remembered writing it. I had been 16. Heartbroken after another Christmas newsletter. Another photograph without me. Another year pretending everything was normal. The letter had been addressed directly to Eleanor. Inside, I'd written, "Grandma, I don't think Mom likes talking about this. But sometimes I feel like I don't belong here." I stopped reading because I remembered the rest. The loneliness. The confusion. The questions. Questions a 16-year-old shouldn't have needed to ask. Eleanor sat quietly, then opened a drawer. Inside were 3 more envelopes. My stomach dropped. "What are those?" She looked at me. "More letters." I stared. "From me?" She nodded. "For letters. For separate years. None delivered. None answered, none acknowledged. For years I'd assumed Eleanor ignored them. For years she'd assumed I stopped writing. Neither was true. Someone had broken the connection, deliberately. And suddenly a terrible possibility emerged. What if it wasn't just my letters? What if hers never reached me either? For the next 2 hours we examined everything. Dates. Postmarks. Addresses. Handwriting. The pattern became obvious. Whenever correspondence passed through the Ashford estate, it disappeared. Birthday cards, holiday letters, graduation congratulations, entire years of communication. Gone. Not lost randomly. Targeted. Selective. Intentional. Eleanor grew quieter with every discovery. That worried me. Because angry people react, quiet people think. And Eleanor was already thinking. Hard. Finally she asked, who handled household mail during those years? The answer came immediately. My mother, always my mother. Neither of us said it aloud. We didn't need to. The conclusion sat between us. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Almost impossible to ignore. 3 days later Eleanor invited my parents to lunch. Not a social lunch. Not a family gathering. A meeting. Everyone knew it. Including my parents. I wasn't present, but Margaret was, and later she told me everything. Every word. Every reaction. Every lie. The meeting began politely. Tea. Conversation. Pleasantries. Then Eleanor placed the letters on the table. And everything changed, according to Margaret. My mother's face lost color immediately. Not much, just enough. Enough for Eleanor to notice, enough for Margaret to notice, enough to matter. What are these? My father asked. Eleanor answered calmly, letters from Victoria. Silence, and they were never delivered. The room became very still. My mother recovered first. There must be some misunderstanding. Of course, there always was. Whenever evidence appeared, whenever accountability approached, whenever truth threatened the story. A misunderstanding? Eleanor repeated. Her voice remained calm, dangerously calm. For separate letters, a pause. Over for separate years, another pause. All addressed correctly. Silence. Margaret told me my father attempted logic, postal errors, administrative mistakes. Lost correspondence. Every explanation sounded reasonable, until you considered the volume. Then they sounded ridiculous, because one missing letter is an accident. For as a pattern, dozens become evidence. Eleanor knew that. So did everyone else in the room. The meeting ended without a confession, without an admission, without resolution, but something important happened. For the first time, my parents understood they were losing control. The narrative wasn't working anymore. Too many facts existed. Too many questions remained unanswered. Too much evidence had survived. And truth has a strange habit. People assume they can bury it, delay it, hide it. But truth rarely disappears. It waits patiently for the right person to start asking questions. Eleanor Ashford had started asking. And she wasn't finished. Not even close. That evening she called me. Only one sentence. Just 6 words. Words I would never forget. Victoria, there's much more here. Then she hung up. And for the first time in my life, I realized the photographs weren't the real story. They were only the cover. Something far larger was hiding underneath, and together, we were about to uncover it. Looking back, I think this was the moment everything truly changed. Not when Eleanor found the letters. Not when she questioned the photographs. Not even when she confronted my parents. Those were discoveries. This was an investigation. And Eleanor Ashford had spent 70 years building a reputation as someone who never began an investigation she wasn't prepared to finish. The first thing she did was surprisingly simple. She requested every Christmas newsletter from the past 16 years. Every version. Every draft. Every mailing record. Nobody questioned the request. At least not publicly. Why would they? The newsletters belonged to the family archive. Eleanor technically owned the archive. She had every right to review it. The problem was never the request. The problem was what she found. 3 days later I arrived at the estate. The library table had disappeared beneath stacks of binders. Photographs. Correspondence. Event records. Guest lists. Charity publications. Family announcements. 16 years of carefully documented Ashford history. Or at least the version intended for public consumption. Eleanor sat at the far end of the table wearing reading glasses. A yellow notepad rested beside her. Every page was covered in handwritten notes. She looked up as I entered. Good. Her voice was calm. To calm. That worried me. Good. I asked, We've found a pattern. My stomach tightened. Patterns were dangerous. Patterns transformed isolated incidents into deliberate behavior. Eleanor slid several newsletters across the table. Look, I sat down. The first newsletter was from when I was 8. The same year as the first missing photograph. I already knew what I'd see. The family portrait. The smiling faces. The absence. But Eleanor wasn't pointing at the photograph. She pointed at the achievements section. Caroline wins riding ribbon. Caroline attends youth competition. Caroline participates in charity event. My eyes moved lower. Nothing about me. Not a single mention. Keep going. So I did. Age 9. Caroline featured twice, age 10, 3 times. Age 11. For. Age 12. 5. Meanwhile my section remained empty, or nearly empty. Occasionally, one sentence appeared. Victoria enjoys reading. Victoria remains academically focused. Victoria spends time independently. The descriptions felt strangely familiar, because they weren't achievements. They were explanations. Excuses. Justifications. Reasons for absence. My throat tightened. I had never noticed before, not completely. Because children don't usually analyze newsletters. Adults do. And suddenly, I saw them through adult eyes. Every omission. Every adjustment. Every carefully selected detail. The narrative wasn't accidental. It was being written. Year after year. Now compare these. Eleanor handed me another folder. This one contains school reports. Awards. Certificates. Letters. Actual records. I stared. National debate competition. Honor society recognition. Scholarship invitations. Volunteer awards. Academic distinctions. The list continued. For pages. None of it appeared in the newsletters. None. A strange feeling spread through my chest. Not sadness. Not anger. Something harder to define. Validation. Because evidence removes doubt, and doubt had followed me for years. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was sensitive. I was dramatic. That was what I'd been taught. The record said otherwise. Eleanor studied me carefully. How long have you known? The question surprised me. Knew what? That they were rewriting reality. I looked down at the documents. Then answered honestly. I think I've always known. A pause. I just never thought anyone would believe me. The words hung in the room. Because they were true, painfully true. Eleanor looked away. For the first time since this began, she appeared guilty. Not responsible. Guilty. As though she blamed herself for missing something important. Finally she spoke. I should have noticed. No, her eyes met mine. I should have. A pause. I was looking at the family. Another pause. I wasn't looking closely enough at the people inside it. I didn't know what to say because part of me agreed, and part of me couldn't bear the thought. So I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Neither of us spoke after that. Sometimes silence communicates better than language. The investigation continued for weeks. And every discovery led to another. Guest lists revealed I had been excluded from events I was supposedly invited to. Correspondence showed invitations addressed only to Caroline. Charity publications repeatedly identified Caroline as the sole Ashford daughter. One article even described her as the future face of the Ashford family. As if I didn't exist. As if there was only one daughter. By then Eleanor had stopped looking surprised. She looked determined. Then came the discovery that changed everything. The discovery neither of us expected. An old accountant's report, buried inside foundation records, prepared nearly 15 years earlier. At first it appeared irrelevant. Financial projections, tax planning. Trust structures. Estate recommendations. Normal wealthy family paperwork. Until Eleanor noticed a handwritten note, a note attached to one of the planning documents, a note written by my father. The words were short. Only one sentence. But they stopped the entire investigation. Focus public succession planning around Caroline. Silence filled the library. Neither of us moved. I read the sentence again, then again. Then again. Focus public succession planning around Caroline. Not because of achievement. Not because of ability. Not because of merit. Because the decision had already been made. 15 years earlier. Before anyone knew who we would become. Before either daughter had grown up. Before either daughter had a chance. The outcome had been chosen in advance. And suddenly every missing photograph made sense. Every newsletter. Every omission. Every explanation. They weren't reacting to reality. They were manufacturing it. Building a public narrative around a predetermined heir. And removing anything that complicated the story, including me. For a long time neither Eleanor nor I spoke. Then she slowly closed the folder, very carefully, very deliberately, and when she looked up, I saw something new. Not sadness, not disappointment, anger. Real anger, the kind that appears only when someone has finally seen the full truth. Eleanor, I asked quietly. She stood, walked toward the window, looked out across the estate. Then said, they didn't exclude you because you failed. I swallowed, because some part of me still needed to hear it. They excluded you because you existed. The words hit harder than anything else, because deep down, I knew she was right. For 15 years they had been protecting a story, and I was evidence against it. When Eleanor finally turned back toward me, her expression was resolute. The investigation was over. She had reached a conclusion, and Eleanor Ashford was not the type of woman who ignored conclusions. Victoria, yes, her voice was calm, steady, certain. It's time to confront them. And for the first time in 16 years, someone was finally prepared to fight for me. The summons arrived on a Monday morning. No explanation. No agenda. No room for negotiation. Just a short message from Eleanor's attorney. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford requests your presence at the estate this Saturday at 1 p.m. Attendance is expected. Expected. Not requested. Not encouraged. Expected. Everyone understood the difference. Especially my parents. For decades, Eleanor had rarely invoked her authority directly. She didn't need to. Her reputation usually accomplished the task. When she finally did use it, people paid attention, including my father, including my mother, including Caroline. And including me. I arrived 15 minutes early, mostly because I was nervous. Partly because I wanted a few moments with Eleanor before everything began. The estate felt different. The air seemed heavier. Staff moved quietly. Conversations stopped when people passed each other. Doors closed gently. Everyone sensed something important was about to happen, and nobody knew exactly what. Eleanor waited in the library. The same library where we had spent weeks reviewing evidence. The same library where the truth had slowly assembled itself piece by piece. The same library where my life finally started making sense. She looked calm. Far calmer than I felt. Are you ready? She asked. No, I answered honestly. A small smile appeared. Good, I blinked. Good? People who aren't nervous before difficult conversations usually aren't taking them seriously. That sounded like Eleanor. Wise. Terrifying. Completely reasonable. At precisely 1 o'clock, the family arrived. My parents entered first. My father wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored, perfectly pressed, perfectly controlled. My mother looked equally composed. At least on the surface, but I noticed the tension around her eyes, the stiffness in her posture, the uncertainty. For perhaps the first time in her life, Caroline followed several steps behind. She looked uncomfortable. Not angry, not defensive. Worried. Which surprised me, because until recently, worry had always been someone else's responsibility. The attorneys arrived next. Then Margaret. Then two longtime trustees from the Ashford Foundation. The gathering felt oddly formal. More formal than a family meeting, less formal than a courtroom, somewhere in between, which was appropriate, because judgment was about to occur. Eleanor remained standing. Nobody sat. Nobody spoke. The room waited. Finally she began. For several months, I have been reviewing family records. Silence. I initially believed I was investigating a misunderstanding. Her gaze moved toward my parents. I was wrong. The room grew even quieter. I discovered a pattern. A pause. A pattern spanning 16 years. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. Eleanor picked up the first binder. The Christmas newsletters. She opened it. Turned a page. Then another. Then another. The sound echoed through the room. Soft. Deliberate. Unavoidable. Double quotes. 16 consecutive years. Another page turned. One daughter repeatedly highlighted. Another page. One daughter repeatedly omitted. My mother shifted slightly. The movement was tiny, but Eleanor noticed. Nothing escaped Eleanor anymore. Would anyone like to explain that? Silence, long silence. The kind that becomes an answer. Finally my father spoke. The newsletters were never intended to cause harm. There it was. The first defense. Intent. Not action. Intent. People love defending intent, because outcomes are harder to justify. Eleanor nodded. Interesting. Then she picked up another binder. School records. Awards. Scholarships. Volunteer achievements. Can you explain these omissions as well? No answer. National debate recognition. A page turned, academic distinctions, another page, volunteer awards, another page, leadership programs. She closed the binder, none mentioned, silence. Then came the letters. The room visibly changed when those appeared, especially my mother's expression. Eleanor placed the envelopes on the table, one by one. For letters, for years, for missing conversations. Perhaps someone can explain this. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Because there was no explanation, only excuses. And excuses sound ridiculous when evidence is sitting directly in front of them. My father attempted one anyway. Mail handling was complex. Margaret actually laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Enough to expose how absurd the statement sounded. Eleanor didn't smile. Complex. She looked down at the letters, then back at him. Remarkably complex. For the first time, my father appeared uncertain. Not defeated. Not yet, but uncertain. And uncertainty was new territory for him. Then Eleanor revealed the document, the handwritten note, the sentence, the one that changed everything. Focus public succession planning around Caroline. The room froze. Even Caroline, especially Caroline, because unlike the newsletters, unlike the photographs, unlike the letters, this was proof of intent. Proof that the outcome had been planned, designed, engineered. Years before either daughter had become adults, years before anyone could claim merit, years before reality existed. The story had been written in advance. My father stared at the document. His face revealed nothing, but the silence revealed everything. Eleanor's voice became very soft, the most dangerous version of her voice. Tell me. A pause. When exactly was Victoria supposed to have a chance? Nobody answered, because there wasn't an answer. The room remained silent. 1 minute. Then 2. Finally Caroline spoke. Not my parents. Caroline, I didn't know. Everyone turned toward her. Tears filled her eyes. I swear I didn't know. For the first time in the meeting, nobody looked angry, only sad, because suddenly the truth became larger than favoritism, larger than inheritance, larger than photographs. It became a story about damage, and damage spreads, even to people who benefit from it. Caroline looked at me directly. For perhaps the first time in years. I'm sorry. The words hung in the room. Simple. Honest. Painfully late, but honest. I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing. Sometimes silence is more truthful than rehearsed forgiveness. Eleanor nodded slowly, then looked toward my parents, and asked the question nobody wanted. The final question, the question that would determine everything. Do either of you have anything you'd like to say? My father remained silent, completely silent, but my mother. My mother finally broke. And what she admitted next would shatter the Ashford family forever. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The room felt frozen. Like the entire Ashford family had been trapped inside a photograph of its own. Perfectly still, perfectly silent, perfectly exposed. My mother's hands rested on the edge of the table. For years I had watched those hands arrange charity galas, sign checks. Direct staff. Control situations. Control narratives, control people. Now they were trembling. Very slightly, but trembling. Eleanor waited. She didn't rush. She didn't interrupt. She simply watched, because after 70 years of dealing with powerful people, she understood something important. When the truth finally arrives, silence is often more effective than pressure. Eventually my mother exhaled, a long shaky breath, then she looked directly at me. Not past me. Not through me. Not around me. At me. For perhaps the first time in years, I'm sorry. The words barely reached above a whisper. Nobody reacted, because everyone knew that wasn't enough. Not after 16 years. Not after everything. Even she knew it. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she said something unexpected. It wasn't supposed to become this. Eleanor's expression hardened. What exactly was it supposed to become? The question landed heavily, because suddenly everyone wanted the same answer. Even Caroline, especially Caroline. My mother stared down at the table. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded distant. Like she was remembering something she'd spent years trying to forget. It started when Victoria was 7. I frowned. 7, before the photographs, before the newsletters. Before all of it. What happened when she was 7? Eleanor asked. A painful smile appeared on my mother's face. She embarrassed me. Silence. I blinked. That couldn't be it. Could it? My mother laughed softly. A broken laugh, the kind people make when they finally hear themselves out loud. It sounds ridiculous now, because it was ridiculous. but she continued, "We were hosting a fundraiser." I remembered those, hundreds of guests. Political figures, business leaders, reporters, events where appearance mattered more than reality. One donor asked Victoria what she wanted to be when she grew up. Nobody interrupted, and she answered honestly. A pause. She said she didn't care about money. Excellence. My mother looked directly at me. "You told him wealthy people spent too much time pretending." A few surprised expressions appeared around the room, including mine, because I barely remembered it. Then fragments returned. The ballroom. The donor. The conversation. His laughter, not mocking laughter. Amused laughter, because children say honest things adults avoid. I was 7, I said quietly, "I know." My mother's voice cracked. "I know." The room remained silent. Because everyone sensed this wasn't really about the comment. Not entirely. It wasn't the first time. My mother continued, "Victoria always asked questions." Her eyes shifted toward Eleanor, questions I couldn't answer. Then toward my father, questions that complicated things. Then back to me. Questions that made people uncomfortable. Suddenly, I remembered something my father had said in my apartment. "You were always difficult. Not difficult. Curious. The realization hit me again. My parents had never wanted a daughter who challenged narratives. They wanted a daughter who fit them. Caroline fit. ID in single quotas. My mother wiped away tears. Then said the sentence that changed everything. "The truth is," her voice broke. "The truth is I saw myself in her. Double quotes. Silence. Complete silence. Even Eleanor looked surprised. My mother laughed bitterly. I hated that. Nobody understood. Not yet. My father ignored me," she said softly. Eleanor closed her eyes. Because she knew, she remembered, my sister was the favorite. Another pause. I spent my entire childhood trying to become someone worth noticing. The room felt smaller. Suddenly. Pain has a way of shrinking spaces. When Victoria was born, tears slipped down her cheeks. I promised myself I would never feel weak again. Nobody moved, nobody interrupted. Then she grew up, a sad smile, independent. Another smile, confident. Another, unafraid. Her eyes met mine. And I resented her for it. The confession hit harder than anything else. Because it was real. Ugly. Uncomfortable. Human. I kept waiting for her to need approval. A pause. She never did. I stared at her, because she was wrong. Terribly wrong. I said quietly. The room fell silent again. I needed it every day. My voice remained steady. I just stopped asking. The look on my mother's face shattered something. Because for the first time she understood. Not intellectually. Emotionally. She understood the cost. The years, the loneliness. The damage. Not in theory. In reality. And reality is much harder to escape. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Eleanor finally did. Very softly. "You became your father." My mother closed her eyes, because she knew. She had spent her life running from exclusion. Only to become the person creating it. The realization devastated her. And somehow, watching it happen didn't feel satisfying. I thought it would. For years I'd imagined this moment. The confession. The exposure. The accountability. I thought it would feel like victory. Instead it felt tragic. Because nobody wins when pain becomes inheritance. Nobody. Eventually Eleanor stood. The meeting was over. Not because everything had been resolved. Because everything had finally been revealed. And sometimes revelation is enough. At least for one day. As people began leaving, Eleanor remained behind. Watching. Thinking. Planning. I recognized the expression. She had reached another conclusion. And when Eleanor Ashford reached conclusions. Action followed. A week later, she would summon her attorneys. A month later, she would rewrite the future of the Ashford family. And 6 months later, the reading of her new will would ignite a war nobody was prepared for, including me. The first thing Eleanor changed wasn't the will. It was the foundation that surprised everyone, including me, for decades. The Ashford Foundation had been the center of the family's public identity. Scholarships. Museums. Hospitals. University grants, charity galas. Officially, it existed to help people. Unofficially, it also preserved influence. The foundation carried the Ashford name into every room that mattered. Control of it was power, real power, which was exactly why Eleanor acted there first. 3 weeks after the confrontation, she called a special board meeting. Nobody knew the agenda. That made my father nervous. People who rely on control dislike surprises, especially expensive surprises. The meeting lasted less than an hour. When it ended, two things had happened. My father lost his position as chairman, and Eleanor appointed an independent board. The decision stunned everyone, including the trustees, including the attorneys, including my father. For the first time in 30 years, he no longer controlled the family's most visible institution. The newspapers framed it as modernization, governance reform, strategic restructuring. Corporate language, the real reason remained private. At least for the moment. The second change arrived 2 weeks later. The attorneys began appearing at the estate almost daily. Boxes of documents arrived, accountants came and went, financial advisors reviewed records. Meetings filled Eleanor's calendar. The entire family noticed. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone suspected the same thing: the will. One evening Eleanor invited me to dinner. Just us. The library again. By then it felt like our headquarters. The place where truth lived. She poured tea. Then handed me a folder. I immediately pushed it back. No, a smile touched her lips. You don't even know what's inside. I know enough. The folder remained between us. For several seconds neither of us moved. Then Eleanor nodded. Good. I blinked. Good, yes. A small smile appeared. That's exactly why I'm comfortable making changes. I frowned. Eleanor, Victoria. Her voice became serious. Listen carefully. So I listened. For 16 years your parents believed this family existed to preserve assets. A pause. I disagree. Another pause. Families exist to preserve people. The words settled into the room. Quiet. Powerful. True. My estate reflects that belief. I looked away, toward the windows. The gardens. The fading sunlight. Because part of me already knew where this was heading. And I didn't want it. Not like this. Not because of guilt. Because money wasn't the point. It had never been the point. I don't need compensation, I said softly. Eleanor smiled sadly. I know. That answer somehow made everything harder, because she understood. This isn't compensation. She folded her hands. This is correction. Correction. Not revenge. Not punishment. Correction. The distinction mattered. At least to Eleanor. And eventually. It mattered to me too. 2 months later the family received notice. A formal invitation. Attendance required. Again. The language looked familiar, which immediately made everyone nervous, especially my parents. The reading would take place in the main conference room at the estate, not because Eleanor had died. She hadn't, not even close. She simply wanted everyone to understand her decisions while she was alive. A very Eleanor approach. Transparent. Direct. Impossible to challenge later. The room was full when I arrived. Attorneys. Trustees. Financial advisors, family members. Enough witnesses to eliminate ambiguity. Enough witnesses to eliminate spin. My father sat rigidly. My mother looked exhausted. Caroline appeared terrified. Eleanor entered last. Walking slowly, but confidently. The room stood. Every person, without being asked. That was influence. Not wealth. Influence. When everyone sat again, the lead attorney opened a folder, then began reading. The first section covered charitable commitments, expanded scholarships, increased grants, additional medical funding. Very Eleanor. Nobody reacted. Then came the family provisions, and everything changed. The estate would be divided into multiple trusts, not concentrated under a single heir, not controlled by a single branch, not dominated by a single narrative. The structure itself was revolutionary by Ashford standards. My father's jaw tightened immediately, because he understood what it meant. Control was gone. Forever. Then came the statement. The personal statement. The one Eleanor had written herself. The room became silent. Because everyone knew her words mattered more than the money, the attorney began reading. For many years I believed fairness existed naturally within this family. A pause. I was mistaken. Nobody moved. A legacy built on exclusion deserves correction. I felt Caroline stiffen beside me. The exact phrase, the same one she'd mentioned months earlier. For 16 years one granddaughter was repeatedly diminished in service of a narrative. Another pause. The evidence speaks for itself. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father stared straight ahead. Motionless. Double quotes. No inheritance can restore lost years. The attorney continued. No financial gift can replace stolen relationships. The room felt smaller. Heavier. Double quotes. However, responsibility requires acknowledgement. I swallowed hard. Because suddenly this wasn't about assets. It was about judgment. Public judgment. Permanent judgment. Then came the final paragraph. The one nobody expected. Each member of this family shall receive exactly what they demonstrated they valued most. Confused looks appeared around the room, including mine. Then the attorney explained. Control of the foundation, removed from family ownership entirely, placed under independent governance. Because influence had been abused, the estate itself, distributed broadly. Because concentration had created imbalance. And the Ashford archives, the photographs, the letters. The records. The history. All of it. Entrusted to me. The room froze. Not the money. Not the properties. The history. The truth. Suddenly I understood. Recognition. That was what Eleanor meant. Months earlier, everyone received what they valued most. My father valued control. He lost it. My mother valued appearances. She lost authority over the narrative. Caroline valued belonging. She kept her place in the family. And me, I valued truth. So Eleanor gave me responsibility for protecting it. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Eleanor looked directly at me. And smiled. A small smile. The kind grandparents give when they're proud of something, or someone. The meeting ended shortly afterward. But the consequences had only begun, because the will changed more than finances. It changed power. It changed perception. It changed the future. And outside the walls of the Ashford estate. People were already starting to talk. The story was spreading. Questions were spreading. And for the first time in 16 years, the carefully crafted Ashford image was beginning to crack. The story escaped the estate 3 days later. Not through the family, not through Eleanor. Not through me. Through gossip. The oldest communication network in human history. Especially among wealthy families, people imagine old money society operates differently from everyone else. It doesn't. The clothes are more expensive. The houses are larger. The scandals are quieter. That's all. Secrets still spread. Just more elegantly. At first the rumors were vague. Something happened at the Ashford estate. A dispute involving the foundation. Questions about inheritance. Family disagreements. The usual whispers. Then details started appearing. Missing photographs, missing letters, the excluded granddaughter, the rewritten history. And suddenly people became interested. Because wealthy families fighting over money is common. Wealthy families fighting over truth is much rarer. By the end of the month everyone seemed to know some version of the story. Most versions were wrong. Some were wildly wrong. But the central fact survived. For 16 years one daughter had been pushed out of the family narrative, and Eleanor Ashford had discovered it. That part remained consistent, because it was true. The first major consequence appeared at a charity gala. I wasn't there, but Margaret was, and according to her, it was spectacular. My mother entered the ballroom expecting a normal evening. Instead she spent 3 hours answering carefully disguised questions. Questions like, how is Victoria these days? Or, has your relationship improved? Or, I heard Eleanor became very close with her recently. On the surface those sounded harmless. They weren't. Among old money circles, direct confrontation is considered impolite. People weaponize curiosity instead. Every question carried the same message. We know, maybe not everything, but enough. For the first time in decades, my mother wasn't controlling the conversation. She was reacting to it. A week later another board member resigned from one of my father's organizations. Then another. Then another. Not because of wrongdoing. Nothing illegal had happened, nothing criminal. The issue was judgment. Trust. Perception. If someone could spend 16 years manipulating their own family narrative, what else might they manipulate? That question lingered. And questions are dangerous, especially unanswered ones. Meanwhile, my life became unexpectedly complicated, because people started contacting me. Lots of people. Strangers. Journalists. Former classmates. Distant relatives, even old family friends. Most wanted details. The story behind the story, the scandal, the drama. I ignored almost all of them. Because I hadn't spent 16 years fighting to be seen, only to become entertainment. Truth deserved better than that. One afternoon I received a letter. An actual letter. Handwritten. Unexpected. From a woman named Rebecca, someone I'd never met. The envelope contained only one page and one sentence. Thank you for reminding people that exclusion leaves scars. No explanation. No signature beyond her first name. No return address. I read the sentence 3 times. Then placed the letter inside my desk drawer, because somehow it mattered. The next week another letter arrived, then another. Then another. Different people, different lives, different stories, yet all of them shared something familiar: being overlooked, being erased, being treated as less important, being made invisible. I realized something surprising. My story wasn't unique, only visible. Thousands of families create golden children, thousands create scapegoats, thousands build narratives around convenience instead of truth. Most never discuss it, most never challenge it, most never change it. That realization stayed with me. Then Caroline called. For the first time since the reading, "Can we meet?" Her voice sounded hesitant, uncertain, human. I agreed, not because I trusted her, because I was curious. We met at a small cafe in Connecticut, far away from Manhattan, far away from the Ashford name, far away from expectations. Caroline arrived first. She looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The confidence she'd worn her entire life had faded, without our parents directing the narrative. She seemed unsure who she was. For years I'd envied her. Sitting across from her now, I felt something else. Sympathy. Not because she suffered more than I had, because she suffered differently. Being the favorite child damages people just in quieter ways. She stared into her coffee. Then finally spoke. "Do you hate me?" The question surprised me. Not because she asked, because she sounded genuinely afraid of the answer. I thought carefully. Really carefully, because honesty mattered now. More than comfort, more than convenience. No. Caroline blinked. No. I shook my head. I was angry. A pause. Very angry. Another pause. But hate. I looked at her. Really looked. The girl from the photographs. The girl who always stood beside our parents. The girl who got everything. Or so I thought. No. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Because sometimes forgiveness arrives where punishment was expected, and that can be harder to process. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then Caroline whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." The confession broke my heart because it was honest, painfully honest. For years she had been cast in a role. The heir, the favorite, the future. Now the script was gone, and she had to discover herself without it. I understood that feeling better than anyone, because I'd spent years doing exactly that. When we left the cafe, nothing was fixed, nothing was magically resolved, but something had begun, something real, the first honest relationship either of us had ever had. Meanwhile, Eleanor watched everything quietly. The gossip. The fallout. The consequences. One evening she invited me to the estate again. The library. Always the library. She seemed tired, not weak, just older. For the first time, I noticed it. And suddenly I remembered she was 91. Not immortal. Not permanent. Human. That realization frightened me more than I expected, because after finally finding her again, I couldn't imagine losing her. As if sensing my thoughts, Eleanor smiled, then handed me a photograph. A new photograph. One taken the previous Christmas. The real one, the candid one, the family picture that actually included me. I stared at it. For a long time. Then Eleanor said something I'll never forget. "That one belongs on the wall." I smiled, because for the first time in 16 years, I agreed. But neither of us realized it yet. That photograph would soon become far more important than either of us imagined. The invitation arrived in October, earlier than usual. Much earlier. Every Ashford Christmas was planned months in advance, but this felt different, more deliberate, more personal. The envelope contained only a single handwritten note. "This year, everyone comes. Eliana." Nothing else. No schedule. No instructions. No explanations. Just 6 words. And somehow those 6 words carried more authority than any legal document. Because everyone understood what Eleanor meant. Everyone. No exceptions. No exclusions. No missing daughters. No missing photographs. No missing seats at the table. Everyone. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't nervous about whether I'd be included. I was nervous because I would be. The difference mattered. December arrived quietly. Snow covered the estate grounds. The trees glowed with white lights, garlands wrapped every staircase. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon. The decorations hadn't changed, but the atmosphere had. The Ashford estate no longer felt like a museum. It felt like a home. I arrived 2 days before Christmas. Eleanor insisted everyone stay on the property. No excuses. No hotels. No convenient escapes. Which meant my parents were there. Caroline was there. And so was I. Together. For the first time in years. The first evening felt awkward, painfully awkward. No one quite knew how to behave, the old roles no longer fit, the new ones hadn't formed yet. At dinner conversation stayed safe. Weather. Travel. Books. Foundation updates. Nothing emotional. Nothing difficult. Everyone carefully avoided the obvious. Until Eleanor intervened. Naturally. Halfway through dessert she looked directly at my father. "What are you reading lately?" He blinked. "A biography." "Which one?" He answered. Then she turned toward me. "Victoria," I answered. Then toward Caroline. Then my mother. Around the table. Simple questions, yet something unusual happened. Everyone participated. Equally. No favorites. No hierarchy. No invisible people. Just conversation, normal conversation. I couldn't remember the last time that happened, maybe it never had. The following morning I found Eleanor in the library. Of course. Where else? She sat beside the fireplace reading, a blanket across her knees, a cup of tea beside her. For a moment she looked very old. Older than I'd ever allowed myself to notice. She smiled when she saw me. "Good morning." I sat beside her. "Morning." Silence settled comfortably between us. Not awkward silence. Peaceful silence. After several minutes she closed her book. Then asked, "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. Not because it was difficult, because nobody had ever asked it before. Not directly. Not seriously. I thought about it. Really thought about it. The past year. The investigation. The confrontation. The fallout. Everything. Then I smiled. More than I was. Eleanor laughed softly. A realistic answer. I laughed too. Because life wasn't perfect. Families rarely become perfect, especially families carrying this much history. But things were real now, and real was better, much better. Christmas Eve arrived, traditionally the most important Ashford event of the year. The formal dinner, the annual photograph, the holiday toast. The traditions that had once excluded me, this time felt different from the beginning. The photographer arrived shortly before sunset. The same company the family had used for years, perhaps decades. I felt my stomach tighten immediately. Old habits. Old memories. Old wounds. The ballroom looked exactly as it always had, massive Christmas tree, golden lights. Perfect decorations. The setting was familiar. The fear was familiar too. Then Eleanor entered, and everything changed. The photographer began arranging people, naturally placing Eleanor in the center. Then my parents. Then Caroline, the old formation, the familiar formation, the formation that left no space for me. Before anyone could react, Eleanor raised a hand. "No." The room stopped. The photographer blinked. "Excuse me," Eleanor pointed. "Victoria stands beside me." Simple. Direct. Non-negotiable. The photographer immediately adjusted positions, and suddenly there I was, not hidden, not missing, not forgotten. Included. The strange thing wasn't being in the photograph. The strange thing was realizing how natural it felt. As though I'd always belonged there, because I had. The camera flashed. Again. 16 years after the first missing portrait. The picture was finally complete. Afterward we gathered in the dining room. Champagne glasses sparkled. Candles flickered. Snow drifted outside the windows. Then Eleanor stood. The room immediately quieted. She lifted her glass, looked around the table. At every face, every member of the family, and smiled. "When I was young," she began, "I believed families were defined by reputation." A pause. I was wrong. Everyone listened. No one moved. "They are defined by honesty." Another pause. "Or eventually destroyed by the lack of it." The words settled over the room. Gentle. Unavoidable. True. Then her eyes found mine. And remained there. "To second chances." She raised her glass. "To truth." Everyone followed. "To truth." The glasses touched. Crystal ringing softly through the room. And for the first time in my life, Christmas felt like Christmas. Not a performance. Not a photograph. Not a carefully managed event, a family gathering. A real one. Late that night I walked through the hallway. The old hallway. The one where the missing photographs had once hung. Most had been removed. Archived. Stored away. In their place hung something new. The photograph from earlier that evening. Everyone included. Everyone visible. Everyone present. I stared at it for a long time, then smiled, because after 16 years, I finally recognized the family looking back at me. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that this would be Eleanor's last Christmas, and the final lesson she planned to leave us was still waiting. The phone call came in February, a Tuesday. Gray sky, cold rain, ordinary day. The worst moments often arrive on ordinary days. I was answering emails when my phone rang. Margaret. Immediately, I knew. Not because of logic, because of instinct. Some news announces itself before words appear. I answered. Margaret. Silence. Then, Victoria. Her voice cracked. And suddenly I couldn't breathe. Eleanor passed away this morning. The world stopped, not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough. Enough to make everything feel distant. Muted. Unreal. I don't remember the next few minutes. Only fragments. The desk. The window. The rain. My hand gripping the phone. Margaret continuing to speak. Details. Arrangements. Family notifications. None of it stayed with me, only the sentence. Eleanor passed away this morning, 91 years old. Peaceful. In her sleep. Exactly the way she wanted. That didn't help, not even a little. Because grief doesn't negotiate with logic. By evening I was driving toward the estate. The same road. The same gates. The same house. Yet everything felt different. Because for the first time, Eleanor wasn't waiting inside. The realization hit hardest when I entered the library. Her chair remained beside the fireplace. Empty. A blanket folded neatly across the back. A book resting on the side table. Reading glasses beside it. As though she might return at any moment. But she wouldn't. That truth settled slowly. Painfully. The funeral took place 4 days later. Private, exactly as Eleanor requested. No reporters. No publicity. No speeches from politicians. Only family. Friends. People she genuinely cared about. The church overflowed anyway. Not because she was wealthy, because she mattered. There is a difference. A profound difference. As I looked around the sanctuary, I realized how many lives she had touched. Former scholarship recipients. Foundation employees. Friends. Neighbors. People from every stage of her life. People who came because they loved her, not because they benefited from her. That might have been Eleanor's greatest accomplishment. After the service, everyone returned to the estate. The house felt quieter than I had ever known. The absence wasn't physical. It was something deeper. A missing center. For decades Eleanor had been the gravitational force holding everything together. Now she was gone, and everyone felt it, even my father. Especially my father. He stood alone near a window for most of the afternoon. Older somehow. Smaller. Loss equalizes people. No amount of money protects against it. Late that evening the attorneys arrived. Not for the will, that had already been handled. This was something else, a final instruction, left specifically for after the funeral. The lead attorney carried a small wooden box. Dark walnut. Simple. Elegant. Very Eleanor. Everyone gathered in the library. The entire family. Just as she had requested. The attorney opened the box. Inside lay several sealed envelopes, each labeled with a name. My father. My mother. Caroline. Victoria. One final letter for each of us. Nobody spoke. The room felt sacred somehow. As though Eleanor herself remained present, listening. Watching. The attorney distributed the envelopes, then quietly left. For several seconds nobody moved. Then Caroline opened hers first. Tears appeared almost immediately. My mother followed. Then my father. Finally I opened mine. The handwriting was unmistakable. Strong. Precise. Confident. Even at the end. The letter began simply. My dear Victoria, if you're reading this, then I am gone. I stopped, just for a moment, because suddenly it became real again. Painfully real. Then I continued. The first thing I need you to know is that I was wrong. I frowned. Wrong. I spent too many years believing strength meant independence. You taught me that strength also means connection. Tears blurred the words. I blinked them away. The greatest regret of my life is not noticing sooner. The greatest gift of my life was having the chance to correct it. My chest tightened. Do not spend your future fighting the past. Understand it, learn from it, but do not live there. A pause. Then you deserved better than what happened. Never confuse that truth with victimhood. You survived because you are stronger than the story they wrote for you. I could barely continue. Now write your own. Silence filled the room. The kind of silence that exists only when someone says exactly the right thing. At the bottom of the page sat one final sentence. One final instruction, and please hang the photograph. I laughed through tears, because of course she wrote that. Of course, when I looked up, everyone else was crying too, even my father, especially my father. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. My father stood, walked across the room. and stopped in front of me. The room became very still. I failed. You? The words were quiet. Simple. Honest. No. Excuses. No explanations. No qualifications. Just truth. And for the first time in my life, I believed him, not because everything was fixed, not because the damage disappeared, because accountability had finally arrived. Real accountability, the kind Eleanor spent months fighting for. That night, after everyone went to bed, I remained in the library. Alone. Or almost alone. The photograph rested beside the fireplace. The Christmas photograph, the complete one, the honest one. I carefully hung it above the mantel, exactly where Eleanor wanted it, then stepped back and smiled, because the picture wasn't perfect, neither was the family, but it was real, and after everything that happened, real was enough. As moonlight filtered through the windows, I looked one final time at the photograph. At the people inside it. At the story it represented, and I finally understood Eleanor's last lesson. Family isn't about who gets the center position. Family is about making sure nobody is pushed out of the frame.